Okay, so today I'm going to do another random mobile iPhone stream, and so that one took a little bit to start just because I tried to do that somewhat, like, okay, I tried to stream every day, so I try to get in the cutoff point of like, oh, it's like 11:59, so I just want to start, and then I knew I wouldn't be able to start for a few minutes, but there are some streamers who are really bad about that, though. Like Trainwreck's always used to be made fun of for that. Like, he would do these super long intros, like for hours, right before he would start. Or I guess my thing was I would go AFK a lot when I first came back. Right, in 2021, I would do it like that, where I would stream for long periods of time, and so the end result was still positive. Like, I was doing it for longer than I could ever do now, even, or any other point. Right, like 6 to 8 hours I would go. And sure, I'd be AFK in there here and there, but it wouldn't be like, it would still be a net positive, right? Would you rather be there for 8 hours, but you go AFK for 2 here and there, randomly, abruptly even? Or would you rather do like 2 hours uninterrupted, right? Like, it's still more that you're getting out of it. So let's look at one concept here that I discussed in my debate format of old, basically the lowest common denominator effect, or sort of the playing dumb effect, right? A lot of the time, there is this strange perception, and we get a lot of these new age labels and stuff to go along with it, the weaponization of medicine or, psychology, that is just totally bogus. The way that some of these terms and labels are used, it's just nonsensical. But specifically what I want to say is, it's just, because you got to think, oh, did these things not exist before? Right, like whatever label you want to use, modern, I won't even use them. Modern labels, right? Did cavemen suffer from that? Did, people hundreds of years ago suffer from that? And did it stop them from doing what they had to do? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? It's totally made up bogus. What you're trying to do is you're trying to attribute everything, right? It's an attribution fallacy. So you say, oh, somebody's clean, they like to be clean, so therefore they're OCD. We're going to label it. Like, okay, but label doesn't matter. Like, okay, if you label me, you negate me. It's kind of like everybody could be labeled something. Everybody has idiosyncrasy. So you take anything anybody does and say, oh, let's label that as like, oh, they're defined by it, as if it's not something that anybody could just do, or a preference they could just have, or, even something they would stand by. Okay, they like to be clean, so what's wrong with that, right? It's not even necessarily a bad thing, but you get this label mentality. So the dumbing down aspect that I was talking about is the fact that, society and a collective mass of people expects you to kind of dumb down to a certain level, right? This sort of normative level. And so what happens is often what's considered negative is not so much that, oh, you're dumb, right, or something, you come off a certain way, is that you don't dumb down enough, right? Or you're pretending or putting on the act. So here's the difference. If you dumb down to a certain collective level, that's good. Or no, it's a bad thing if you show awareness of it. So it's like both scenarios, you're acting the exact same way, right? You're dumbing down to a certain lowest common denominator. But in one situation, right, you would actually be that dumb, so that comes off as genuine. This is how society defines genuine, right? You actually are that dumb, or you actually are that surface level, initial minded kind of, what you see is what you get. Your 5 senses you're limited to. You ignore the 6th sense of being able to think or have any other kind of awareness, and so you're dumbed down, and that's a genuine good person by society standards. Something bad would be projected like, oh, you show awareness of a process. The process and the action could be exactly the same, right? You also dumb down for the benefit of society, but now you show awareness of it or a little inhibition about doing it. Oh, now that's a bad thing. That means you're fake. That means you're, somehow, again, it'll project like, oh, you have some ulterior motive, or you have some other, nefarious thing. It could just be, again, you're dumbing down for the benefit of society, etc., but it doesn't mean that you want to, or that you vouch for it, or that you are happy about it, right? So those are the two scenarios, and what's telling about that is, again, the defining factor is the awareness of it, not the process. The process is exactly the same, right? You could act exactly the same way, but one of them, you're authentic, I guess, in the fact that you really are that dumb without needing to dumb down, right? Or you've allowed yourself to be fully dumbed down, just period, right? It's kind of like what you see with younger, like maybe the borderline teenage years, right? You see people act in a way that is just like whatever they think people will respond positively towards, right? And they'll do it kind of like even at times where it doesn't make sense, or even at times where, right, they'll mold their whole personality like that. Like they'll act that same way around their parents as they do in school, right? They'll try to put on this, whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever they think people respond positively towards. So it sort of shows you that, again, you can reduce yourself fully to that, or you can still retain some self-awareness despite that, right? Because there's always like some pretense of a functional basis. Like, okay, it can be useful to do that. It can be useful to dumb down for a mass collective, although arguably not. And that comes to the problem of overextension. Like, well, it's just because there's so many people that you have to do that. So the more people there are, the more you have to dumb down, or the more you have to overextend everything. One of my favorite logical razors from my old format was everything mass-produced suffers in quality for it. So it could be education, could be anything. So again, even society, even human life itself, right? If you have this standard of just more people, right, now you kind of lower the standard of everything, even though you think technology kind of counters it. It's an interesting dynamic. Well, there's more people to make technology and run that would also try to counteract that. But there's just a minimalistic baseline that you don't need that, right? Like, oh, look at, we have running water and we have all these, modern technology, but a lot of that you only need in the first place because there are so many people, right? If there were less people, all of that goes out the window because, the world is a big place with abundant resources. So it's kind of an inverse fallacy, right? Like, oh, you have all these modern luxuries, but you only need them in large part because of the sheer number of people that you have. If the world was a village of 100, this is a concept I always refer to, right? Then the world is your oyster. Everything is yours for the taking, kind of, it's just all there, right? There's no way 100 people could possibly, right, use or consume everything. So it's a self-created problem. That's why I always talk about the vouching of the state and the stimuli acme. Like, it's a big deal when people have kids. It's a big deal to do that. So make sure you vouch for the state that you're in, whatever that might be, right? It should be this perfect state that you vouch for instead of some conflict of contrivance that you perpetuate, right? It's kind of, it kills your credibility, right? That's the number one thing within my absolutist philosophy. Like, if you have children, you have zero credibility because it's one of two things. You either perpetuated a contrivance state that you didn't vouch for, right, that you have issue with, that you have conflict of contrivance with, that you are, flawed by your own standard within that, right? So you have no credibility there because you're perpetuating a conflict of contrivance that you don't vouch for. You're just a mindless, hedonistic animal who can't control themselves and has no standard and just mindlessly, randomly did it, which causes greater overextension and perpetuation of a process, again, that you didn't even vouch for yourself. Number two is if you do vouch for it, then you also have no credibility because that means you should be in a perfect utopian state. So you have no room to complain or bitch about it or, oh, look, I'm struggling to put food on the table for the kids, but you're the one who had them that don't have them, right? You should be in a perfect utopian state if you vouch for it. Or, again, you use it as an excuse or overcompensation or false kind of value or meaning behind it, right, that you wouldn't need otherwise. Like, I wonder how it sounds from here. Like, now the phone is on my lap, so you probably can't even hardly hear me, but sometimes the iPhone mic is pretty good, but I think I have to talk quieter. I sometimes underestimate it. I always assume I have to talk louder because I'm driving and, like, right, that I'm driving, so I think I have to talk louder, but the reality is that it sort of makes it worse if you talk louder anyway. And then sometimes a Bluetooth headphone works as a mic too. The biggest problem with these type of sessions is people like to see your face for whatever reason, from my understanding of it, right? Like, this isn't good enough by itself. You need to show your face and appeal to cult of personality and maybe even a little to stimuli acme. Speaking of, like, you preserve something through that, against preserving stimuli acme, reproducing, whatever, having kids. So yeah, your credibility is shot because it should be a utopian perfect state, so don't complain about it or use it as an excuse, otherwise you shouldn't do it in the first place. Or if you do it, then again, either you don't vouch, which means you don't have any credibility, you shouldn't have done it, or you do vouch, in which case it should be perfect and you shouldn't use an excuse. So it shows you the really the low standard that people use for human life in that way. That it's just some expendable garbage to just be, well, you're just a hedonistic animal, so you can't help yourself, so just do it, and then use that as the basis of your, ego gratification to rationalize what would otherwise be an aimless, half-mass, zero-sum existence within a subversive contrivance state, right? So it serves as a good overcompensation and placeholder, but again, it is the ultimate killer of credibility that basically I could show it in like very comical ways, almost like, oh, do you have kids? Then you have no credit. Like, you're in a debate, you're in this forum of people coming up on stage and discussing things or something. So right, if you have children, you vouch for the state, so it also gives you credibility, the absolutist here. If you don't have kids and you don't intend to reproduce, or you hold it to a high standard of accountability, that gives you credibility, because you could say, this is one of the key tenets of absolutism, is this absolutist seeks finality, right? Whereas, you would have this half-mass, mindless mass in every era of human history, where you would just mindlessly go along with whatever's in front of you, reacting to it, things you didn't choose, but acting like they're absolute and perpetuating them, right? You go along with whatever, you're just a mindless sheep. So that is the mass of people. And so what that means is that basically you're in a position to, again, you're a mindless mass of people going along with whatever's in front of you. And the reason why that's relevant is because that means that you would do it no matter what, kind of. And you're just sort of, how exactly did I say it? Like, so the mindless mass will go along with anything versus, and has no real standards, right? They're just insisting upon things they didn't choose, or again, like a nearness postulate, ego basis. But there is a certain credibility to the absolutist here, whereby you basically are in a position to say, well, because we're not preserving that, we have credibility and we have a sense of finality. So for example, pretend, okay, that person is going to not have kids, and when they die, that's it. So in other words, they could be living their life in that sense, like with a sense of finality and accountability, instead of just, we're acting as if, there's a few phrases I use here, like, again, this half-mass, mindless mass would live as if they're going to live forever, right? And they sort of are only they're going to reinforce and perpetuate whatever is in front of them, no matter what it is, right? With no standard, no objective criteria, nothing. Just whatever it is, what are the chances this mass of people, right, in every era always feels indignant and just sort of, right, goes along and perpetuates whatever's in front of them. So they'll do that uncritically, mindlessly, just treat it as an absolute. And so what that further goes to show is that when you preserve it, it's a situation where again, this mass would do it no matter what, with no standard, uncritically, non-choice reaction, insistence, egotism, right? All of this basis. So the problem with that is the fact that that's one of the things I've realized, even as much as I, obviously have always psychologically analyzed people. I'm surprised to some extent at the level that the ego is used to control people and how much people don't realize it, right? Like, a lot of things aren't about intelligence or anything like that. The way that society really gets you is through the human ego. And so one of the key things here is the simple fact that, again, let me try to explain that again, because this is one that I haven't discussed maybe in some time, is the fact that, again, the absolutist has credibility within a sense of finality, because they didn't choose, right? You don't choose the state that you're in and what you're reacting to, etc., right? So they didn't choose to be born. They didn't choose their family. Nobody chooses those things. So now the credibility would come in from, okay, they're not perpetuating that state by having children. They're not vouching for it, so they could just end it with them, right? Like, okay. So, in other words, they're not at any point vouching for that state and saying, okay, I chose this, or I want this, or this is validated, or I'm going to perpetuate it and continue it on. Right, they're not doing that. Or they're saying they'll only reproduce if they're in a state that they do vouch for, that they do choose, that they do create, that is sound, right, by whatever standard or measure they might have, is besides the point. Right, it would mean that it would have to be something they vouch for, instead of just mindlessly doing it and then reacting and saying, well, since we already have kids because we couldn't control ourselves, or since we're already in this state, let's just reinforce it. Right, that is not the way that an absolutist would work. So here, once again, you have the accountability, and that comes back to something here that, again, the credibility within a sense of finality, like, they're not going to have kids, or they don't have kids, right? So now they can look at everything like in a zero-sum sense. They're not trying to preserve a longevity process. They're not trying to reinforce and regurgitate contrivance standards. They're not trying to vouch for the state. So, like, let's say somebody does something, they live like sort of what seems like an extreme lifestyle, right, outside of the norms and conventions of society. You might condemn them and say, oh, that's bad, but really that shows you your own cognitive dissonance, that you're not at peace with your own state, and that it sort of reveals and invalidates your own kind of conflict of contrivance, because what happens is, like, they could just be free from that, and you say, oh, but that's not sustainable, basically. That's society's objection to it. Oh, that's not sustainable, but who says that they're trying to sustain it, right? Who says that they're adherent to the longevity process, that, oh, they're trying to live as long as possible? Is that the standard, that you're trying to live as long of a life as possible? But then why do people smoke? Why do people drink, right? They're half-mass hedonists. They sacrifice longevity process for pleasure or other, whatever it might be, right? Hedonistic elements. So the other point with that is the fact that you have the sense of finality as well, where contrivance and everything could end with them. They're not vouching for it. They didn't choose it. They're not perpetuating it. Right? So in other words, you could think like, oh, they could do whatever they want. But it's that framing is sort of, again, within contrivance too, as if they would need permission, as if a person needs permission to do whatever they want. No, they need a good reason and inhibition to not do something, which we're in such an overextended state that we don't think of it like that. Right? We would think we have to justify. This is like the false inherent contrivance response state, that we act like we have to justify what we do. Like, oh, you want to do this thing that you're capable of doing, right, from birth, and it's, one of the many infinite countless things that people can do, right, that are capable of doing. You have to justify doing that, not that you have to justify not that society would have to justify preventing you from doing it or inhibiting you from doing it. So you always use this fallacy of, well, some small number of people do bad things, so therefore we have to restrict everything for everyone. That's not a very sound process, because, right, as if you have to justify or get permission for every little thing you do, but that's the overextended state that you're in. And I'm surprised that people put up with it, but it's sort of a bread and circuses argument where, well, but you have this excess of technology or convenience, so you use that to kind of balance it out, even though the two have nothing to do with each other. That's why the absolutist is not sort of satisfied by that, because an unsound process is an unsound process. It doesn't matter if you have the bread and circuses of Rome versus earlier civilizations that would have had lesser technology, lesser overcompensation, the peasants working for heaven, right, promises of heaven. Oh, that wasn't good enough compared to the bread and circuses of Rome, which is a better overcompensation, versus what we have today with entertainment, escapism, conveniences of modern technology, right? All of those things don't matter. Is the process sound or isn't it? Not a matter of can we distract ourselves better from it, or can we overcompensate for it, right, with technology. That is not those are two separate things, right? Because by that logic, then, you can always just, if your technology is good enough, you just can't question anything, and it's just perfect and sound. But, so like China right now, it doesn't even have to be a government thing, but just, China right now, you can't question anything because, your technology there now is better than in previous generations, so therefore that justifies it, but it really doesn't. Right, those are two separate things, and the specific government or power structure of society at the time will try to take credit for that. It's all thanks to us that you have that technological state, etc., which is only somewhat true, because who's to say, right? You could theoretically have the same technology or similar technology in various other states, either whether it be system of government or culture or society, or even without society, or maybe you wouldn't need it then, right? The minimalistic mindset. So, but no, they try to take specific credit for it. Our exact establishment or power structure is responsible for the overall technological state that we're in and all the conveniences we have, even though that's not true, because you see in other parts of the world, they could be also advanced without, needing that exact state. So it doesn't vouch. It doesn't vouch for that particular state. And so, yeah, that's one significant concept of the absolutist philosophy of my own creation that I always talk about. That's one of the core tenets that I would use is, again, the sense of finality. So it's hard to tell somebody, think about how you would restrict them. Oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, or that's a bad thing to do. And then let's analyze, okay, why is it a bad thing to do? And it's only bad by a collective mass overextension, or by, again, a longevity process, or, again, reinforcing contrivance. So if that person doesn't value those things, right, see, because if you have children, it raises some accountability issue. Well, that means you vouch for it and you want to perpetuate it and this and that. If you don't do that, and again, the absolutist, let's say, isn't intending to do that, now there's a certain credibility that they can say, well, it doesn't matter because they can do whatever they want, because, again, as if they would have to justify it in the first place, because now they'll say, no, they don't vouch for the state. They won't perpetuate it unless they vouch for it, or until they vouch for it, or maybe never. And so now they're free to pursue that or do whatever they want or not do anything, because everything that you'd be saying would be only for, well, we have to do this. Why? For an overextended collective mass that they wouldn't vouch for in the first place, that they didn't choose, that they didn't, again, vouch for, that they didn't create. Right? So it's you can't lump in something with any accountability that, again, they didn't create it, they didn't choose it, they didn't vouch for it, they're not going to perpetuate it. The only thing maybe that happens that's hard to avoid, right, is that you're sort of forced into it, and then now you're given some sort of accountability or validation. That's where minimalism can be the best option, even though there are some fallacies here. Like, you would say, oh, why not just go live in the woods and be minimalistic? To some extent, you can try to do that. But because everything is monopolized to such a degree, right, you monopolize resources and means and everything. What happens is, if you try to do that, there'll be so many obstacles to it, right? You still, like, this is the ultimate takedown of contrivance that I use from a minimalist perspective, is where I said that basically, even to be free of contrivance or to not be part of a contrivance state, you would need the contrivance state's permission, right? So, like, to be free of society and just to not be a part of it, you still need its permission to do that. Right, so, you try to go live out in the woods and you hunt and you fend for yourself, but oh no, now you need a hunting permit, fishing permit, license. You have to follow all these other rules to do with that. You have to, right? So again, this is what rules and structure exist to really do, is to keep you in a half-mast state where nobody can ever truly, fully be free at any time in anything. Everything has to be restricted. Everything has to be deferential back to the contrivance state, even if it serves no purpose, even if it's just kind of the whole purpose that it is serving, right, is not exactly sound, because it's just what you're doing is, again, you're trying to perpetuate a false absolute contrivance state that, again, defers to a mass collective of people, but that doesn't have to have anything to do with you, right? At no point do you have to vouch for that. But no, it's like the minimalist takedown would be that, you're in a position to, you try to do that, fend for yourself. So you don't want the benefits of society, but you don't want it to inhibit you either. So, like, even as you try to escape it, it's going to try to stop you. Right, there's always this emperor has no clothes fallacy, like, oh, you just don't get it, or that's somehow your fault, or that somehow you are just, you have the inability to practice this absolute contrivance state, but yet maybe it's not absolute, so it couldn't be a choice. Like, the reason why you would prefer that or be a minimalist in the first place couldn't be because you decide that, like you couldn't possibly choose that. Oh, it's just because you're not good enough at being part of this contrivance state, assuming that that's an absolute, that you would not want to be a part of it. So again, there's a situation where okay, let me try to remember that phrasing. I keep forgetting it. Again, you need society's permission even to not be a part of society. So, there could always be this fallacy, like, oh, well, if you don't like this, then you just don't have to be a part of it, right? There's this false duality that takes place, right? So, okay, if you want to be a minimalist, then right, then why don't you just go do that? Okay, so a person goes and tries to do that. They go out in the woods, they try to hunt, fish, fend for themselves. But, oh no, you need a hunting permit, fishing permit, license. You can't do it these hours. You have these restrictions, this restriction. And so you're not even trying to be a part of society. You're just leaving it and saying, okay, I'm going to fend for myself, mind my own business. But they'll still try to restrict you and inhibit you, right? Oh, you're on government land, you're on corporate land, you're on, private property. Right, there's so many restrictions. Even when you're not, you don't want anything from it. Okay, I'll fend for myself, but even the land, even the nature, even the entire all natural resources, all of that is owned and monopolized by government, corporations, other people. So this notion that you want to be a minimalist, just go and do it, but you're not even allowed to do it. Even that has to be within the permission. You see how that works? Like, that has to be within the permission of society. First you would have to buy your own land and then have like a minimalist commune and then, do it from there instead of, right, instead of being able to do it inherently. So that is always a contradiction, right? If we were at a debate and I was presenting myself as a minimalist, or not even really arguing for it, but just presenting the idea of it, people can say that, oh, well, why don't you just go out and be a minimalist if you want to? Well, let's think about the obstacles that society would pose to you trying to even do that, right? And it would inhibit every element, every layer, right? Oh, you're committing a crime by trying to hunt and fish off of nature, because that's somehow you're poaching or you're stealing or you're doing something, right, in the pretense of some law. But in reality, it's just a way for, again, big corporations can monopolize that. So, oh, you have to buy it from them. You can't do it yourself. You can't be free. So basically what it shows you is that people are even dumber than you think they are, and so have no credibility collectively, because what happens is you go for all these pretenses that, oh, it's to protect something, right? It's just so that big corporations can ravage it for themselves. Like, okay, to what I call, again, you take a monopoly over means. So it's not so much corporate monopoly, the way that sometimes people misunderstand. Whenever you say monopoly, that's what they think you mean, but it's not even about that. It's about the societal monopoly over everything, like nature, land. So it doesn't even have to be like who is monopolizing it. It's just like, you, in other words, you can't do anything without its permission, right? You need permission to even be free of it, to even live out in the woods, right? Like think about this hypothetical person, right? You don't want the benefits of society. You just leave. You have no possessions, nothing. You just walk out into the woods. You walk out naked, right? And this is always a dramatic example in one of my short stories that's pretty funny. You walk out into the woods, right? And what's the first thing that happens, right? Oh, you get arrested for one of two things. I think I just said this like yesterday, didn't I? I always refer to the story. It's like you walk out with nothing on his back. So now, what does society do then? Oh, we arrest him. So, I don't know if it crashed or if I'm just getting an ad break in my own stream. So I have to wait right when I'm in the middle of this good story. Having to watch ads on my own stream is kind of ridiculous, but I guess because I'm either not logged in, or I guess it sort of simulates what the viewer experience would be like. I don't run ads ever, but they force you to somewhat. So no, the point is that, oh my God. So what you do is you decide to basically you do it in a minimalistic way that allows you to, again, you go out into the woods as a minimalist. You don't need the benefits of society. You don't want anything, right? But you just don't want to be inhibited by it either. So that seems like the trade-off, right? You're just neutral, the inherent man, as I talk about. And so what that means is you're able to basically do it in such a way that, oh no, but that discredits you because you're taking some benefit of society with the clothes on your back. Okay, that it made, and that you bought and whatever. So okay, you take that off, but now you get arrested for public indecency or exposure on your way out of society because, oh, they prevent you from being naked. So they force you to wear clothes, but then they arrest you, but then they discredit you for wearing them if you try to be a minimalist. So you're only doing it for their benefit, but then you're defined by it, and that's somehow you relying on society or vouching for it, which is an analogy for society overall. It's like, oh, you rely on it and you need it. Is it that, or is it that, again, you're born into it, you're indoctrinated into it, you didn't choose that, and then even if you try to free yourself of it, again, they try to stop you, or it's more like, oh, you rely on society. It's more that it relies on you, the individual, because, how could you rely on it when it inhibits everything that you do, right? Let people be free, and they did just fine without society before too. Like, you could hunt, you could fish, you could live off the land, you could pick berries. Like, it's not like people couldn't survive, right? You could argue a certain convenience or quality of life, but that's a moot point with this, because this notion that, you need society, you rely on society. In what way, right? You only rely on it for the overcompensations and conveniences that are a trade-off for it inhibiting you in every area of life anyway. So what that means is, again, society inhibits every single thing that you can do, and you need its permission to do it. And then somehow society will come back and say, see how you rely on it, see how you have to abide by it because you're forced to do it. So it forces you to abide by it, and then that somehow validates it. See how you rely on it? No, it's not that you rely on it, it's that you defer to it, right? You tolerate it. Right, but you could easily say, okay, you could do without it, and it's even an obstacle, and it's even inhibiting everything that you do, right? So you should hold that accountable instead of acting like, somehow that's your fault, like, yeah, then this character goes out in the woods, right? And then they try to fend for themselves. Okay, they're going to hunt, they're going to fish, but, wait a minute, that's government land, you can't do that, you'll get arrested. Or, that's poaching, you're breaking a law, you need a hunting license, fishing license, permit. Right, and then it's like you might say, just leave society, but everywhere you go is going to be part of some society with some laws, with some overextension, with this and that. So that's the one thing that's always against the law in every country, in every era of human history, right? You can't be free. You can't be truly free from it. Even if you don't want anything from it, you're always part of it, whether you choose to be or not. So, right, freedom is the greatest sin. Like, what harm is this one random person who's just fending for themselves really doing? And the answer is, right, they're really not harming anybody or anything. You could argue, well, if enough people do that, then we might invalidate society overall. We'll show that we don't need it. But that's the real threat, I guess. But again, they try to hunt, they try to fish, they try to live off the land themselves. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to say, now they need a permit, they need a license, they need permission, they have to do it this way, they have to follow certain rules, and they also have to, again, now they're on government land, or they're on corporate land, or they're on private, property. So, no, they're, right, you don't have permission, you're trespassing. Even if it's nature, even nature is owned by somebody, right? Government, corporation, individual, and so it allows you to realize that, it allows you to right, you just recognize, again, everything is owned by somebody, so now you're out in nature, you're out in the wild. How much more separated from society can you be? But, no, you still need permission within, again, permits and licenses and this and that. And, private property and this and that. So think about what you are convinced to do, right? You're convinced to basically give up your inherent freedoms for this illusion of possession in a finite zero-sum existence where the expression is always like, you can't take it with you. But more than that, it's like, it's a situation where you feel like, again, it's for this illusion of like, okay, you carve out this little spot for yourself, other people have their own little thing, so for your own little prison within society, that you can make that prison as nice as you want, you can decorate it, freely, your house, whatever, So you have this nice little overcompensated prison. So you give up everything for that, right? Basically to be restrained, to be controlled, to be kept in one place, to be, trained like an animal. This is what you give everything up for. And so now you understand what that process is really about, because you need permission even to not be a part of it, even to escape it, right? You need permission for that. So, well, that's always a stupid argument when people say, oh, if you want to be a minimalist or something, just do it. I mean, you theoretically could still try to do it, but, it would be very, very difficult to not use anything from society, not because, oh, you need it or you rely on it, but because, you are forced to, because again, everything is, there's so many layers to this fallacy, right? You go out in nature, and then again, everything is owned by somebody, so it's monopolization of means. But even beyond that, it'd be like, okay, even what is left, like let's say, the environment is all ravaged and all the really ripe and great resources are taken, right? They're all already consumed by big corporations too, so there's nothing left. Or the places that you'd be free to go would be the ones with the worst resources left, or the most dangerous environments. It's like, oh, you're going to get killed by some wild animals, which again, that could happen normally without society at all. But the difference is, what happens now is it sort of congregates everything. Like, you're outside of society, so now it could be more dangerous there, because what society does is it pushes everything out into one area. So, obviously in cities and so forth, there's going to be very little wildlife, right? Dangerous wildlife and stuff like that. Whereas in the wild, right? So it creates like an unnatural thing, right? Normally, let's say there was no society at all, it's going to be more spread out. Yeah, there's no doubt there's going to be dangerous wildlife, but it'll be more like, all over the place. Whereas now it'll all be congregated in the areas that society and people don't occupy. So now it makes it seem like, oh, look how dangerous it is. But yet that danger is partly artificial, because the same areas that you'd be free to go to, right, that wouldn't be part of society or like actively populated, would be the same ones that would be most dangerous potentially, because society drives everything out into those areas, right? All the wildlife, dangerous animals, things like that. So, yeah, this audio quality is sometimes hard to judge, right? I think it's sometimes a trap of me trying to trying to talk louder because it's like me trying to talk louder because I decide to because of the sound of the car, but it ends up not really helping. So, oh my god. But yeah, it's those issues of right, the self-contradiction of society that, oh, if you don't like it, just don't be a part of it. Also, if you try not to be a part of it, we'll restrict and inhibit you every step of the way. And so we're practically forcing you to, not practically, like you are forced to do it if you don't abide by it. So, right, it's this is where like entitlement honestly is justified. You say, oh, look how entitled you are. Right, but it would be more like a concession that like, well, you are owed something, because it's like, oh, society can inhibit every area of your life and you need its permission for every little thing. And it comes from, oh, a place of benevolence, or, oh, it's for your own good and this and that. But it's like, the real issue is the fact that how can society inhibit everything that you do and everything in life, but then, oh, you don't get anything back for it? Like, oh, you're entitled. No, you would hold accountable. Like, no, we are owed something, we deserve something, whether it be convenience of technology or whatever, right? You would be deserving of that or expecting something, because Otherwise, what are we inhibiting all this for, right? What is it for? So you act like, oh, it's entitled or privileged or whatever, but in reality, that's a concession for the contrivance state in the first place. The fact that, okay, we inhibit and defer every area of our lives. We need permission. We need, structure, whatever. And we're inhibited in every single way all the time, right? So in exchange for that, you at least better have some good restitution, some good, again, like sort of payback or convenience or almost reward for it, right? So again, it's not really entitlement, it's more just something that you're getting back for all the inhibition and sacrifice from your inherent state that you would have, right? And so this is an active accountability that should be present that isn't, that we sort of just take it for granted as false absolute, especially when we're indoctrinated in youth before we can critically think. So again, society in that way is predatory, the same way that a regime or like a tyrant would be, like World War II Germany. Everyone uses the example, like, or whatever, everyone knows this example, like, oh, the H youth, I won't even say what the thing is, but like, okay, you get them while they're young because then they can't critically think, and then they're old, well, by the time they're old enough, they're already indoctrinated and they associate it with their identity, so it's easier to control them that way. That is the same way that, again, society operates. You might argue, well, it's not as bad as that in the particulars, but that's kind of falling for the trap. It doesn't matter about the particulars because you have, right, it's an unsound process, so it doesn't matter. Like, let's indoctrinate people when they're young so that, they can't question it or critically think, so that somehow validates us and makes us right, even though you could do that with basically anything. And let's use, again, unqualified empirical authority. Let's sort of use the monopoly over means that we have, because they rely on us for food and this when they're young, and we restrict and inhibit everything that they can do, right? We make them weak so we can control them and then say that they need us, right? That's even for adults, right? We try to make you weak and lazy by relying on the convenience of society to say that, oh, this is why you need society in the first place. But the only reason why you need those things or want those things is because of the inhibition in the first place. So it's like, it's what you're left with to react to, but that somehow validates it. Like, what, this is an expression that I use too, is whatever would you do, right, without the benefits of society, but just imagine what I could do without its inhibitions, without its restrictions. You could basically do anything. You could do whatever you want. So you'd be free. The world is your oyster, right? So you're sacrificing and inhibiting and giving up so much for it that, right, it's a trade-off. So it's taken as a false inherent that, that just goes without saying. No, there should be accountability that, like, if you're giving up so much, you would only be natural to expect something in return this way. So these last couple times I've been trying to hold it up to my mouth, basically, in such a way that might be better than like hold it closer to your mouth but talk quieter instead of holding it further away and sort of almost yelling. Right. That kind of seems to work a little better. But yeah, you have a lot of these preconceived notions, and again, the best way to control people is to basically again, sort of divide and conquer. So your enemy is the random individual, right? Your enemy should be some random person like me or whatever, who might be objective observer, neutral, right? Maybe makes you question something. They're the one who you should question. not the unqualified empirical authority ruling by omission, out of sight, out of mind, right? The whole authority structure, right, that controls everything. Don't focus on that. Somehow you get people to focus on the individual, right, in front of them. This is the initial mindedness problem that I talk about. They'll focus on you, the individual, whatever your position might be, but not the larger process, right, that you'd say, right, so it's sort of like you pass down the blame and accountability, right? You'll get mad at the cashier in a grocery store, but not the bosses, the owners, the, kind of corporate heads, out of sight, out of mind, right, who really create the process. You pass it down and they use them as a scapegoat or a whatever. So if you were aware and accountable of them all the time, the owners and stuff, then you would question it. Or it's kind of like how can I describe it? Basically, I don't know, you react to what's put in front of you, so you have this almost like tokenism incentive, and it's a situation where again, you either blame or attack or like you hyperfixate on every little thing, right? Like, oh, this person's in front of you physically, so therefore you can perceive them with your five senses, you see, and therefore you're going to focus and pick on every little thing that they do. Okay, interesting. But you won't do that with someone who's out of sight and out of mind. So that makes the person, again, like the owner, executive, whatever. So that makes that person perfect and better because you're imagining something better than reality, or you're giving the benefit of the doubt. But because the person in front of you is there, you're going to hyperfixate and criticize everything they do. And so the problem with that is, well, what if we reverse the roles? Let's put the executive there in front of you and put the other person out of sight, out of mind. Now you give them benefit of the doubt. So you're basically punishing, again, just the initial basis and ignoring the larger process at work. So if that person was in front of you, you would hyperfixate and criticize everything they do too. So you're kind of misframing the thing. But again, you're kind of a mindless sheep in that situation, that you just focus on what's in front of you. So we can control your whole perception and reality just by controlling what you're exposed to, which is a lot of what society does and media does. It's ironic because, like in the U.S., you would say, oh, well, it's not like China where your media is still more free, but still, right, the process is the same. It's just like, it's a little secondhand, like, if it's something that would really change or have an impact, then it'll be censored. So you have the illusion of freedom until it's something that really matters and really has an impact and really counts. And so sometimes I wonder, I don't know, what would have happened if I kept doing that back then, this same format. I probably would have gotten in trouble for it, honestly. So like maybe when I'm doing it now, I'm sort of toning it down, but again, what reason would you have to get in trouble? It wouldn't be because you're actually doing anything wrong, but because, again, you break down some preconceptions and illusions that people have, and then that can cause turmoil, but that assumes that those things were validated in the first place. And so it's very odd, but I'll bring it back. I mean, that's what I've been doing here, so I don't know why I like doing it so much while driving, because it feels like, like when I'm actually by my computer, it feels like, oh, well, I may as well, even though I haven't been, I've been mobile streaming anyway there, but like, it feels like when you're there, you may as well use your computer then. Well, but then, and when you're on your computer, you may as well do something more intensive than just simply talking into the mic, like playing chess, of course, that's really intensive, but But it feels like here, like there's nothing else I could do if I was going to stream aside from something like this where I can just talk. So it seems to fit really well, right? So I'm not going out of my way to do it here, and I'm not sacrificing doing anything else that I could be doing, right, in a better setup. So it does seem to make a certain amount of sense. So this one didn't seem to crash, although sometimes when I say that it'll crash right away. But so the Starlink is kind of hit or miss. There's sometimes where it's really fucked up and I don't know why. Right, there's been a few times where it crashes. So I do it on 720p on here, and again, it doesn't really matter, but it should be able to handle that. Like, I'm not showing anything on screen anyway. Or like I just upload. Some of these videos might go viral for the wrong reason. Like I never even, it's certainly not my intention, but like I'm streaming in 144p or some shit and you can't even see what's on the screen. And I'm doing those blind rankings. So it's like, I make the joke like, that's why it's a blind ranking, because you can't see. Because like I was streaming in such shitty low quality, or maybe it was defaulting to that because it was so, my internet was having issues. It's like, because I'm trying to stream on mobile data or test all kind of different things. So so yeah, that was a good discussion. These are kind of not quite as organized as my typical, like when I was actually trying to do the episodes of Absolutist Philosophy, but these are more just kind of random. But I was trying to upload these type of sessions on a more regular basis though, instead of because I'm always on like a 2-week delay where it just takes me that long to get around to uploading what I'm currently doing. And I love the backlog of stuff that I have. Like, again, from 2021 and on, there's so many things I haven't uploaded. But that's why I'm trying to keep up at least with the current things of what I do, which would be really hard to do if I did, like, really long streams every day, but I guess I don't really have time to do that anyway, or I could do it, like, a couple times a week, but like, some of those longer sessions I've done lately have been the NBA 2K stuff, which is a little bit tricky with the file size too, right? Because those tend to be a little bigger than anything else I do. But yeah, these are kind of good sessions to do sometimes. Right, while driving, it's almost like when I don't have time, if I don't have time to do anything else. Okay, so today I'll be doing another episode of the Absolutist Philosophy. So this one is going to be that there are no rights, there are only restrictions, which is not exactly a quote that I said in my old debate format, but kind of the same idea. It's just sort of rizzing up baddies on Hinge. Why do you say that? Was that one of the apps I had on my phone when I was showing it? Like the Polybuzz, like I didn't even know what that was. I was just kind of downloading a bunch of random stuff, but apparently that can get you in trouble maybe, or whatever, like AI companion stuff, and they might do something a little bit naughty. But basically, what was I saying? Okay, so this, I hate always referring back to my old debate format, but it kind of gives a context to this, or it doesn't really matter, but just to give it some structure, especially for people who don't know like what I'm talking about, which they probably still won't know, but whatever, it has some history to it. It's when I'm streaming on the phone, I use that because for some reason Streamlabs doesn't work at all. It crashes all the time on here, so I had to switch to a different one. but, and I actually have to pay to use it, like $10 a month, but whatever. Or like maybe you don't have to, but like you got rid of a watermark or something stupid. But, okay, the point is, this one is called There Are No Rights, There Are Only Restrictions. And so this is the concept of the inherent man and contrivance response, which I talked about in my debate format obviously a lot. These are my terms, obviously, and so we're talking like 2013, 2014, and of course I stupidly didn't really save much from that or anything from that, so I have the Court of Reason channel, which does have some of these terms uploaded, but whatever, just in case you want extra context on what in the world I'm talking about, because it might seem a little bit difficult to understand. But basically the point is that, let's first of all define inherent man. So inherent man would be a term that means the base state of a human being without any external influence or contrivance, meaning society, without indoctrination, without social influence, without laws, without anything like that. So if you were just born in the jungle, and sure, your parents would raise you and live off the land and pick berries and hunt and whatever you got to do to survive, but that would be different than being indoctrinated into a society. So what that means is that base state, which is quite easy to observe from history, from even currently tribes and different, more minimalistic people, but even just in a hypothetical sense, we can easily observe what that nature would be. And so inherent man is defined as, again, the base state of a human being without that sort of external influence and indoctrination. So that's an important term to understand. Korean app about to hack me. Is it even a Korean app? No, but I'm too valuable to them. They'd rather milk me for my $10 subscription, which is totally not worth it, just to be able to stream, just because Twitch itself doesn't let you stream in 1080p on their own app. I don't understand that with both Twitch and YouTube. You can't stream through Twitch directly on the phone in 1080p. It has to be 720p. And then on YouTube, you can't download your own videos in 1080p. You can only download them in 720p. So these huge corporations, these big platforms don't have the means to do what a third-party app is needed to do, which is just to simply download or stream in a, proper quality. It's not like 1080p is that much to ask compared to, like a 4K, some crazy thing like that. And so, again, inherent man, the base state of a human being, uninhibited, not indoctrinated. And then what is the reaction to inherent man is contrivance response, or again, you could call this just society and laws and things like that. So contrivance response is the sort of, it's the way that we react as a society to inherent man. So if there's certain tendencies that people would have, and again, we like to personalize these things, but let's look at it objectively, right? We have laws, and we have morals, and we have everything that we pose, right, as like false absolutes and pretenses. These are like concepts from my old debate format, so this is like a philosophical idea here of the fact that, again, contrivance response, so whether it be morality, whether it be laws, whether it be some other social stigma, standards, etc., those things are not only are they not absolute, as they're sometimes posed to be, especially by religions and so forth. The sort of the three fallacious terms that are used here are either that it is inherent, it is absolute, or it is objective, right? All three of which are not attributable here because they require subjective human enforcement through laws, through indoctrination, through social stigma, etc. And so the point here is that sort of the trick and the trap of society is, despite whatever usefulness you might argue for it, is besides the point. The trick of it is to make you believe, right? This is what I call the false inherent contrivance response. It is to make people believe that the way they're indoctrinated to be by society is how they naturally are. And so we see a lot of this pretense that, like, okay, you're born into society, you're indoctrinated heavily by parents, by school, by media, by government, by social norms, etc. that doesn't mean those things aren't potentially good or useful, although you could hold them accountable and debate them. Maybe some of them are, maybe some of them aren't. If you were in World War II Germany, there was a particular program you would be in if you were young that might not be so good. So if you're in China right now, so you can always question those things on a specific basis. But what it means is they try to get you when you're young, and so now you have the impression that, oh, this is how people naturally are, this is how you are, and this is how it's meant to be, and you sort of unquestioningly accept that, when in reality that's not the case at all, right? So the reason why we have laws and we have social stigma, norms, morality, isn't because they're absolute, but because they're not, and so we have to subjectively reinforce them and give the illusion that they're absolute. So we have to actively uphold them, and so what that means is you're in a position to, I don't know, it's sort of a baseline fallacy, like with morality itself, where it would be treated like, oh, this is the right thing to do, and this is, absolute, and God's will, or it's meant to be, and it's inherent, Not only is that not the case, the very construct of morality is a response to our inherent nature. So like if people would naturally do all the bad things that we consider bad, that's why we call them bad, that's why we stigmatize them, that's why we have laws against them, that's why we have restrictions, that's why we have, social stigma, laws, indoctrination. So those are the two layers, right? We have the threat of enforcement, obviously, to say like, okay, if you do a certain crime, a certain act that inherent man would be capable of doing, right? That would be our tendency potentially to do. So we're sort of acknowledging. See, it's the acknowledgement met with the pretense, like, oh, we're all good people, and people are good, and we never do anything wrong, right? We believe in the goodness of people, but we also acknowledge that we're not good by our own subjective standards, because if we were, we wouldn't need laws. We wouldn't need any of that. So we realize in practice that we're not good by our own subjective standards, but yet because that's why we need laws, etc. But we pretend we are at the same time. So there's some internal contradiction with this. It's similar to the basis of society itself, where there's like a pretense that, people are somehow good, or again by the own subjective standards that society etc. opposes, but that people are good or they're somehow trustworthy, right? So you should treat them in a positive light. But on behalf of those same people and the same tendency, you have to inhibit every area of your own life on the assumption that they're not good, that you're not good, right? That we kind of are skeptical of everything. We have to all be restricted and dumbed down and restrained to a lowest common denominator state for like, our own safety or for some other reason. So it's like, oh, you should trust people. Also, we're part of a society that restricts and inhibits every single thing in your entire life because we don't trust people, because we presume people are not trustworthy, right? So there's kind of that's the basic fallacy of society. Right, let me try to say it one more time more clearly, maybe. Just, again, the premise of society is that let's restrict and inhibit and reduce everything as much as possible because we assume the worst of people, that, we can't trust them, we need locks on our doors, we need security, we need cops, we need this, we need that. We have to always be weary, we're skeptical, we're, projecting, all these different things, right? So we have this all, and even just on an individual basis to rationalize, why are you so restricted? Why are you so inhibited? Why do you need permission for every little thing you do? Why, are you constantly kind of controlled and inhibited and dumbed down and not free? You're not your free inherent self. Why do you have to do that? So you're assuming that yourself and others don't have self-control, that you're not good by your own subjective standards. That's what you're assuming. That's the premise of society. All that inhibition is based on this premise. But then you're supposed to pretend that, people are good and people are trustworthy. Well, if they were, this would be the absolutist phrasing that I use is, well, okay, people are good and trustworthy then, in which case we don't need those restrictions and inhibitions, and so let's do away with them and be fully free, and let's be inherent man and we can control ourselves and self-govern. But you can't have it both ways and say, oh, people are good and trustworthy, but then we have to inhibit and restrict every area of life because we assume that they are not. And then getting back to contrivance response, you have the ability to consider the fact that, again, contrivance response is the reaction to inherent man, which means it doesn't validate that this is how people are. It actually kind of implies the opposite, right? Like, everything that we condemn is not because, oh, we wouldn't do it. It's because we would do it, and that's our way of trying to stop it. So the layers of that are, again, inherent man would do all the things that inherent man is capable of doing, right? Which could include things that we consider crimes and harming people and stealing and basically whatever. They would just do whatever, right? Just as in nature, as if animals, like there's no real law there. It's just, right, people would just do what their inherent nature and tendency could be to do and everything that they're capable of doing. So how do we restrict that? So the first layer is indoctrination in youth. So you have that as a mental layer, like when you're young, your parents are going to teach you, oh, this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do this. Society will reinforce it through media, through government, through social stigma, right? You'll reinforce it there, and then social shaming and stuff like that, public shaming, and then you'll also have enforcement in the back, sort of as the backbone of it all. And so that's an important distinction, because people may want to believe like, oh, we're all good people, and or like individually even like, oh, I'm a good person who would never do anything bad. But it's easy to say that when you have enforcement in place, right, and accountability, like, oh, so you wouldn't do it because you wouldn't do it because you know you could get caught and it's against the law and this and that, right? So if you took away those laws and there was no accountability and you can get away with it, then it would be a different story. Or it's like if, it's the kind of surface level, that's where indoctrination comes in. Like, you have the threat of enforcement to try and discourage people from doing criminal acts, etc., things that might, would be part of their inherent tendency. So again, it's not so much that, there's a certain phrase here that I'm searching for that I can't remember exactly how I said it. It's not that something is inherently wrong or immoral, right, that we call it that. It's actually the opposite. It's not like, oh, that we would never do that, that's why we condemn it. Or that's why, it's we wouldn't do it because it's bad. No, we pose it as bad in the first place to discourage ourselves from doing it, right? It's a little bit hard to explain that point, but so it's not that morality is objective or inherent or absolute at all. It's actually just a construct that's a reaction to the inherent things that we would do, that we try to discourage ourselves and prevent ourselves from doing. Which again, on a functional basis, you can certainly say that's okay, it's useful to do that. Nobody's arguing that laws shouldn't exist, right? Or something like that. This would be the false duality framing that you sometimes get from stupid people trying to argue this. Like, oh, that means you're arguing that these are bad things. No, we're just objectively observing the nature of the process, which is, right, they're constructs. Now we can argue how to best use those constructs to create the desired result, but don't pretend like there's something more than that, because in practice they're not. Like, even you want to pretend they're absolute, but then you still have to actively uphold them at the subjective level, like, again, law enforcement and stuff like that. So when we get back to contrivance response, again, in reaction to the inherent man, and so again, that's one of the things that is a very powerful fallacy, though, is the false inherent contrivance response. You try to pretend like the state that you're indoctrinated into in reaction to your inherent state is actually the real state of being, which is, even though it might seem fine, it's a... Okay, so it crashed there. I should stop doing it in even 720p. 480p would be fine, but whatever. What I was saying is there's like the layers where you try to create the illusion of the absolute, or again, like after immense amounts of indoctrination in youth, you would insist, oh, I'm a good person and I would never do anything bad. And also you have the backdrop of knowing also there's enforcement and laws. So with all those layers in place, it's easy to say, oh, you would never do anything wrong, or the majority of people would never do anything wrong. But the fact that those things are necessary show you that it's not necessarily the inherent or true state. It's an artificial one that we're creating, right? And so now you recognize that, again, those are the layers that we try to appeal to. Enforcement is the operative one, where we would say, okay, if you do something that we consider bad subjectively, right, morally, society, then we'll punish you, we'll put you in jail, etc., right, things like that. And so that might seem like, oh, that's good enough, but that doesn't entirely work all the time, or it maybe is too obvious, right, that, oh, we're just going to threaten you. So instead, we have the other layers of like social stigma, social kind of conditioning, indoctrination, things like that try to make you think that it's your own idea, or to make you extract gratification and ego value from it. And so now you feel like, even with, you're not thinking about the enforcement, even though that's still present and still necessary in effect, you're thinking about, well, somehow it makes me a good person and I feel good about it, and people will socially kind of reward me and gratify me if I behave a certain way. So you're trying to create like a backbone layer to it, where it's almost like you don't need enforcement, even though it's still necessary as a backdrop. You kind of create, again, those are the two layers. Like if indoctrination fails, you have enforcement. If enforcement fails, you try to lean on indoctrination, right? So either way, you're trying to do it either directly, just say, okay, we're threatening you. If you do this, we'll lock you up and things like that. But the other layer is, okay, we'll try to prevent that from being what's relied on. So we'll try to socially engineer it to say, this is wrong, and try to convince you of that, and try to get you to do it on, again, the social level, without needing to just rely on enforcement, but it comes to the same thing. So the indoctrinated basis would be, trying to, I had a better way to explain this that I can't remember. Like, you're trying to get people to do the same result without needing to directly tell them what to do. Like, it's easier to convince them that way. Oh, we're going to lock you up if you do something that society doesn't want you to do. But that sounds too forceful. So you say, oh no, you're a good person, and it's absolute, and it's God's will, and you'll go to heaven, and it's morality, and it's, oh wow, gratifying. So when we appeal to the ego, now it makes it feel like it's your own idea, or you want to do it, or you enjoy it, or it's somehow some higher cause or purpose, right? This is how the human ego is used to control people in a lot of ways. So it's easier to control people that way. Right, when you say, oh no, it's not just some zero-sum process where we're trying to counter your inherent tendencies that you might do through the force of threat, right, and the threat of enforcement. Instead, we're going to say, oh no, it's absolute, and it's meant to be, and it's God's will, and you go to heaven, and we try to appeal, again, to the ego that way. I have a similar explanation for the stimuli acme, like where society wants you to be with only one person in a relationship. And so how does society convince you of that? They don't just say, oh, that's easier for us to manage for taxes and for government and for, organization of society, and even for the family system, right? Society is not going to just say that, like, oh, it's just easier for us to control, so we try to make it like that. No, we'll try to appeal to the ego and say, oh no, it's absolute, and it's love, and it's meant to be, and there's your soulmate, and the one and only, and it's, oh wow. So we try to turn it into something like desirable. So, oh no, you want to be restricted to just one person, and it's special, and it's love, and it's meant to be, and they're your soulmate, right? So you try to trick the ego into valuing something that is actually subversive in nature to what is otherwise an inherent, unrestricted process that we try to specify and structure. And the other point there is the fact that so you have to lay out the premise before I get to the point that I'm actually starting with, or the, and again, a lot of these things you have to realize that the basis of this whole thing was objectivity. So it's not that you're making a claim, right? Like, I'm not making a claim, oh, you should do this, you should do that. You're objectively observing the nature of a process, and then you can decide for yourself what to make of it, or what your measure is, as I call it, kind of how you decide to interpret it. Because that's one thing in absolutist philosophy that I would talk about is, I had this phrase, like, don't assume intent. So you can never assume, like, even society as a whole, it'll be like, well, the goal of people that we can collectively agree upon and base our rules and stuff on is that, oh, people are trying to live as long as possible. Is that the basis of it? Or, how would you define it? But even that you can't do, because guess what? Some people, you smoke, you drink, so you have unhealthy food. So that shows you there's a hedonistic quality that might cut that, what I call the longevity process, short. So clearly living as long as possible isn't a universal intention. So in other words, you can't assume what people's intentions actually are. You have to just let it be and allow it to, So you can always tell people what to do, assuming the measure, like, okay, within this zero-sum measure of what we're trying to do, now we can try to empirically use that. But what you can't do, what if they don't value that measure? What if they value something else? What if they don't care about that? So that's what you bypass, is like you're operating under some assumption. So, okay, here's the last point, is that, again, you appeal to the ego like we were talking about. So that's how enforcement actually works. You might think, why would a person commit a crime or do something that we consider subjectively morally objectionable? Right? Why would somebody do that? They would do it presumably in their own zero-sum self-interest, right? They want something out of it. They want to steal. They want money. They want something they have to gain, right? So if the basis of a person committing a crime or doing something bad by our subjective moral standards would be their own ego and self-interest, then how do we stop them from doing it? Do we appeal to some higher standard or a higher measure, like, oh, God, and it's meant to be, and gratified, and morality, and absolute? Or, right, do we appeal to goodness or some other higher standard? Or do we simply appeal to the same exact standard, the same measure that would make them do it in the first place, their own self-interest? In other words, appeal to the ego. So how do we do that? We use enforcement, or even social stigma, to say, we're going to punish you, right? So we're threatening you and your own self-interest. We're putting that at risk and that at stake to prevent you from doing the same thing that you would do in self-interest. So that's a very, very important thing to understand. So the way to beat self-interest is also with self-interest. It's not a higher standard. It's not a higher measure, right? You're not saying that, the reason why somebody would commit a crime or do something bad is in their own zero-sum self-interest. So how do we stop them from doing that? Do we appeal to something different? No, we appeal to the same thing. We say, okay, we'll put you in jail and put your self-interest at risk if you do this. So the reason why people wouldn't do something in their self-interest is also in their self-interest, right? Because they're afraid to be punished and threatened. So again, just to realize, there is no absolute morality. There is no higher standard. It's the same exact thing you're appealing to. The same reason why somebody would do something bad is the same way we prevent them from doing that same bad thing, by saying, either way, either you're gonna try to benefit the self, or we're gonna try to punish the self, attack your self-interest, put your self-interest at risk. So therefore, you're committing the crime for selfish reasons, or you're not committing the crime for selfish reasons because you don't want to get caught or locked up. That would ultimately be the same basis of appeal, even though through indoctrination and social gratification we try to convince ourselves that there's more to it than that. Again, to say, oh, we're not just being controlled by our process. People don't like to think that way. So, oh no, we're not being controlled by the process. We want to be controlled by the process. We're good people. We're gratified. We're, social reinforcement. So now we get to the actual point of what I started with, which is, so there are no rights. There are only restrictions. So if you go to inherent man and you realize, okay, when a person is born into the world, they're capable of doing, obviously as they grow older and have more physical acuity and so forth, a person is capable of doing anything that they're capable of doing. Anything physically that they can do, they can just do. Right? So there is no inherent restriction aside from the laws of nature themselves that would physically prevent you from doing something, right? So in other words, there are no restrictions. You just exist, and there you are. So now, instead of trying to say that, oh, you have rights, like you have this right or that right, this is the Malcolm X quote that I'll invoke here, that if they can give it to you, they can take it away. It's like, oh, you have all these rights given by the Constitution or given by God or given by this or that, that you have rights and you have certain, almost like it's a privilege. This is not the way an absolutist would look at it, right? This is how I would look at it. You would say, or objectively, this is how you would look at it. You inherently are free and uninhibited in nature. That's just your natural form. You're free to do anything you can possibly do, right? Anything you're physically capable of doing, you can do. So that's just an objective reality. So now it's not that you need to have rights given by something. It's more that you have rights taken away, and so that should be held accountable, and you should be sure that there's a good reason for doing that, if there even is any basis for it at all. So, for example, again, so you would say, oh, people have no rights. There's no such thing as human rights. There's nothing. Because you're inherently free, and you can do whatever you want, anything that you're capable of doing when you're born into this world, right? You don't need to justify anything. You don't need permission. You just exist. There you are. And so you need, when an empirical structure and society and government and everything comes in towards you and tries to restrict and inhibit that inherent freedom that you have, that's not given by anything, you just exist. That's just, how you are. So they need a good reason, and that should be held, very strongly accountable. So you don't need a reason to do something. Right, we sometimes argue things in this false duality perspective, why do you need this, or why should you be able to do this? It's the opposite. Why should we restrict this? Why shouldn't you be able to do this? Right, but we come in from that sort of preconceived premise that we have to somehow justify what we do, not justify preventing people from doing something. Right, you need a good reason to stop someone from doing something rather than needing a reason to do it in the first place, right? You can do anything, and that's not some position or opinion. That's just objective reality. If you can do something, you can do it, right? So you need a good reason to restrict it, which society often doesn't have, and just kind of people empirically just accept unqualified authority. Unqualified empirical authority is just blindly accepted. So yeah, let's try to explain that once more. Just the fact that you're in a position to reject the premise that, there's rights. You have rights. You're born into this world with God-given rights, or with, you're given rights by the Constitution and by society and this and that, right? As if you need those things. No, you're just born into the world. And so whatever you're capable of doing, you can do. And that's not an opinion or a position you can do that, you should do that. No, you're physically capable of doing various things, right? Anything you can possibly do, right? You can just do it. That's just the reality, the objective reality of how the world works. So if there's some restriction that needs to be imposed on that, that should be held accountable. There better be a good reason. There better be, some foundation to it. We better be aware of it. We better hold it accountable instead of just blindly accepting it. So what that means is, again, you don't have to justify things from a rights perspective, I get rights from God, or I get rights from government, or I get rights from the Constitution, or this or that. It's rather that you are inherently free and can self-actualize and can do anything that you're capable of doing. Just an objective reality of nature. You can just do things. You don't need permission, right? You don't have to justify doing something, but society and government, etc., has to justify very strongly and very accountably why it would restrict you in any way. And so, this isn't how it's actually applied, unfortunately, people are mindless sheep who just go along with it. But this would be the very strong way that you hold it accountable, that if there's something you're restricted from doing, there better be a good reason for that restriction, and there better be again a strong accountability that goes into it, right? So you don't need rights, or you don't need to justify doing something. You need an empirical structure, etc., would need a basis to prevent you from doing it in the first place, right? And again, that should be held accountable. And so again, there are no rights, there are only restrictions, and those need to be justified and qualified and held accountable, and are often not, and are just overextended. And so on that same note, you talk about a basis for outward insistence. So as in, a collective or society would have no credibility from this basis, because again, it involves the assuming of the intention, which is inconsistent. So you would say, what basis does society or any other person have to tell another person what to do? And the answer really is that there is no basis, because everything is subjective. So this is one of the reasons why God is posed as like an absolute above everybody else. Because see, no matter what you say, right, like let's say a collective mass of a large number of people, millions of people, agree on a certain point, right? Whether it be something moral or any aspect of society. Millions of people agree, but it doesn't matter, because that's still millions of subjective people. So they could be wrong throughout history. People have done all kinds of questionable things, even collectively, even government, supported by the government, and enshrined in law, whatever. Just, there are a lot of things you could question, so people aren't credible that way. And even if, again, the number of people, so it's like, a million subjective people say and agree on one thing, and one individual subjective person says something different. So in other words, it's hard to win that, because it doesn't matter at that point, because it's one subjective word versus another, so everything is arbitrary and subjective. So all it would take to undermine that is somebody just disagrees, and so their subjective word is the same as anybody else's. So right, it's on the same level, the same form, the same type of value. So just having more people who agree doesn't necessarily make you right. Or even if it did, then it's arbitrary, because what if they had? So that would be the only difference. If they had more people agreeing, then that would make them right. So it exposes that as kind of a flawed process, because it's just one subjective person versus another, or one subjective view versus another. So right, there's no credibility there. Now, when you look at the basis for outward insistence, there's a few problems with that as well. That you have, again, what would give you this, again, qualified empirical authority and basis to restrict or structure things, or to allow, or to basically, again, tell others what to do. The problem with that is you're assuming their intent. So you're saying, okay, this is what they want, or whether it be longevity process or something else. But what if they don't want that? What if they have some other measure or intention in mind? Right? You can't force that on somebody and say, this is what you want, and so therefore you have to do this to achieve it. But what if they don't want that? What if they want something totally different? So that's a very, very unfair criteria. So you have again, unqualified empirical authority, and it allows you to because again, where does that authority get its justification? And if you actually analyze the origin point of it, it's going to be arbitrary on a few levels. This is where I say, the absolutist carves the path, whether you like it or not. You'll say, you'll stand on certain moral principles, right? Like, we believe in this, and this is right, and so on and so on. But you only do that. Morality is the plaything of conquerors for their descendants to squabble over. This is a quote from one of my short stories, which is similar to things you hear sometimes in politics for other reasons, but like, morality is nothing but the plaything of conquerors for their descendants to squabble over on lands, on the graves of in the conquered, and in a country built on the in a nation built on the backs of slaves and on the graves of the natives. So like, you can act moral and on a high horse, but only after benefiting from some great immorality that happened in the past by your own standards. So in other words, there is no qualification. It's like, you only got to this point and you're only in this position because of something you wouldn't have done or you wouldn't agree with. So like, an absolutist comes along, historically, let's say, Genghis Khan does something, and he just conquers and he just does something that is effective. And so it's a Darwinistic thing. It's not about, it'll be condemned, like, it's immoral. Genghis Khan was an evil guy. But yet every other leader and ruler and king might have wanted to do the same thing, right? They were conquering each other too. They were fighting each other too. So he was just better at it than everyone else. So don't mistake lesser ability for greater morality, or greater ability for lesser morality, right? It's like, it's the same process at work. You're just better at it. That's why we remember you. But everyone else was trying to do the same thing, let's say, and he was just better at it. So again, that's where an absolutist would dictate the course of history either way. Like, you could condemn them, but that's what makes something happen, right? That's what pushes things forward, or defines value. So you would say, you would condemn the same process, but you would still benefit from it, or again, you would be on the spoils of it. So it's easy to act on a moral high horse once you've already benefited from and reacted to that. Like, you're if you're in a country, and this applies to everywhere, that's why I'm not trying to specify it. Like, you're in a country that was, again, built on the backs of slaves and on the graves of the natives, and yet now you're going to act on a moral high horse. But if that didn't happen, right, if those immoralities didn't happen, then you wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be in this position to, maybe do anything at all. So the credibility of outward insistence is the fact that basically you there's no basis for outward insistence because everything is subjective and arbitrary. So it's like the non-basis of self, as I call it, like everything is zero-sum self-interest. So it's just overextended to a greater or lesser degree. And so what basis for empirical authority could there be? If you look at the origin point, you'll see it's arbitrary. Like I just pointed out, the immorality, or even just, it's some random dude. Again, either it's something you would have, like the origin point of why you are in a certain position, right? And the authority behind it, and the situation, kind of the government or the society that you're in, right? The origin point would either be discredited morally, and you'll say, well, it was founded on this immoral thing that we would condemn now, but since it's already done, we just accept it and we treat it as somehow credible. Or it would be based on something arbitrary, like, some person in the past just decided randomly to do something a certain way, and now we just blindly accept it and don't think about it because we're not actively acutely aware of that, right? Like, it's the origin point fallacy of critical thinking. If you saw me or some person come up with an idea in front of you, you might question it. You'll critically think, that's dumb, or I saw it was just some random dude who came up with this idea. You would question that, and you would critically think about it and scrutinize it. But because, it was done in the past and we just blindly accept it, and the origin point is out of sight, out of mind, we accept it. It's like a good example with tradition, like holidays and stuff like that. Oh, these things are arbitrary. If you try to introduce a new one, people would question it. But you just blindly accept the old ones, which again, it could be as simple as that. Some random person arbitrarily, subjectively just decided to do something, and then it just caught on, and then everyone just does it mindlessly. So if you were acutely aware of the origin point there, you would question it and say, not saying that you can't do it, but it wouldn't be so uniform or treated like an absolute. So the basis of that shows you the way that empirical authority exists is often not based in soundness and logic and reason as a result of contemplation and debate or anything like that, especially in like a specified universal sense, like one size fits all or some mass scale, because it wouldn't be so uniform, right? I always say there's nothing that would possibly lead to the specific contrivance state that you're in right now, right? No logical path or sound process would lead to that, right? Because it can't be the longevity process, because again, people drink and smoke, and there's not one logical sound basis or measure that would lead to the exact state that you're in, which shows you that, again, the unqualified empirical authority is based on bypassing critical thinking rather than actually answering it or being justified by it. So it's not that, the reason why society is the way that it is the authority structure is because that's the right way and it's reached by some logical conclusion and discussion and objectivity. No, it's reached that way because of bypassing critical thinking by, again, indoctrinating people when they're young, too young to think for themselves. By the time they are, now we'll punish them or, use authority to bypass that. So it's not that it's answering all the questions, it's that it's bypassing asking them in the first place, right? Because again, indoctrination in youth and using like force and conditioning and reward punishment and, sort of training people like animals, none of that is actually justifying the specific state. So you're treating it as absolute, but again, the basis of it is arbitrary because again, it's based on the fact of bypassing the questions rather than providing the answers, right? It doesn't answer anything, it just prevents people from asking it at all. And then you there's like one other point. Is the fact that again, you have like unqualified empirical authority, but then you also have sort of like forcing it on people, outwardly insisting, and again, no credibility because everything is arbitrary, subjective. You can't assume the intent or measure that somebody has such that you could tell them what to do, right? Because you can't, assume their intent or force them to have it. All right, what if their priority or their measure is something different than yours? So now it's impossible to say what they should do because that's their basis of value is different than yours. Their priority is different, whatever. So there's like one more expression I had that now I forgot. I was gonna say something. I said something similar to it. But again, the basis of something, the origin point, right, all of that is arbitrary, and so just blindly, mindlessly accepted. Again, it doesn't answer something. it more so removes the need or removes the ability to ask, or so by that logic then it's arbitrary. It could be anything. Okay, so today let's do another episode of Absolutist Philosophy, and this is more like a mini episode where I won't do like a full topic, but basically let me maybe try to explain and define exactly what it is and what I mean by the term, right? So what absolutist philosophy is and how I defined it and how I did all this, again, in my old debate format in 2013, 2014, was pretty much when it ran. Well, first of all, I called it revisionist philosophy, or I had a couple different names for it. Obviously, the Court of Reason is one that I adopted later, so that I have the channel now, right, called that, where I uploaded some clips. But what I'm saying is, the name is that you might assume something about it, like, oh, that means you believe in absolutes, or you try to do everything absolutely, or something like that, right? Which, in a consistency basis, that is true. But what it actually means is that there are no absolutes. So there are no gods, there is no morality, not absolute morality. None of that is actually real, which is objectively true, right? But you can debate it or whatever, but so none of that is real or absolute. So because there are no absolutes, you have to hold everything accountable and be vigilant about it. So the only absolute then, even though it's not an absolute either, though, would be human ability and your own actions, right? Don't defer and don't be controlled like, oh, if we're good in this life, we'll go to heaven or something like that. Don't hold back. Don't let anything, hold you back and inhibit you because, oh, there is no heaven. There is no afterlife. There is no, absolute. Now what would you do if that was the case, right? So then everything is a zero-sum process. So it's just, this is the basis of it. Like, certain things might be condemned in society, like thinking. Thinking is a bad thing, or being self-aware is a bad thing, when really all those things could do is reflect the nature of a process. Like, if the process that you're doing, whether it be society itself or a specific thing within it, if that process is sound and good, then you could think about it as much as you want and it would be fine and it would hold up to it. But what happens is we condemn those things because thinking about it would invalidate it, or at least it would hold it accountable, like, well, by the same process that we value this, we could do it better. We could always do it better. So it leads to that infinite puzzlement of like, well, if you truly value it, you would do it fully. You wouldn't cut it halfway. You can't assume intent of a zero-sum process. Like, it's you also have, even doing this format like this is sort of defeats the whole purpose, right? I have an expression like that where it's like I'd have to dumb it down to people to understand it, but then in the process of doing that, you defeat its own purpose. So there's really no point in even doing it, but whatever. Yeah, there are no absolutes, so not everything what you see is what you get. You have to make the most of it. You have to act. You have to actually do something instead of deferring to some invisible authority, right? Whether it be God, whether it be false absolutes of some process or standard. So whenever an absolute is posed, it's always false, and it's always a means to control you, whether it be God, whether it be like, love, or whether it be morality or something like that. It's used to control you. That doesn't mean that you can't still abide by certain things. But, for example, an absolutist would use a functional basis to say, okay, why do we have laws? We have laws because morals are not absolute, and so then we can rigorously try to discuss how best to use them and try to use them as little as possible, right, like for just the very serious things. But it's sort of a concession. So it's a concession that morality isn't absolute. The fact that you have to have laws in the first place upheld by subjective, imperfect people. So, again, you would, or in a real sense, an absolutist wouldn't have laws at all because they would self-govern, but that would be a little bit too much to expect. So that's the ultimate end game of my whole thing, right? Let me educate people enough about their own capability and their own mind and their own nature so that they can self-govern, which in the overextended mass state of number of people that we have in the world would be very difficult, but that would actually be the end goal of absolutism, but it was to remove the need for all structures. And you might think, oh, how could we do that? But that was done before. That was done throughout history. You can argue a quality of life or this or that, but it would not, I don't know, it wouldn't make much of a case, because even all of human progress has done nothing more than, like, you know, we've done all this, right? All our technology, all our accomplishment, all our achievements. What has it really done? You could say it's improved the quality of life or convenience, or so it's taken the same zero-sum existence and the same needs and tendencies we have, and it just makes it a little more comfortable or a little more convenient, but there is no higher measure at work, right? All you're doing is still zero-sum self-interest, zero-sum sustenance. It's not like, oh, you've elevated somehow to some other basis of value, because right, the basis of value is the same. It's just zero-sum, sustenance, self-interest. So, oh, you can make the food that you eat taste better or more convenient to get or more abundant, but it's still the same process. So if you were tolerant enough, this is the minimalist part of it. If you're a minimalist and you say, oh, I'm happy just living off the land and picking berries and being very minimalistic and maybe living a shorter lifespan and you know, whatever, dealing with it. If you're willing to deal with that, then what's the problem? Then the entirety of society is invalid. You know, modern technological society is invalid. None of it is necessary. It's only necessary by overextension, only real by acknowledgement. This is one of my key absolutist phrases. Contrivance is that which is only real by acknowledgement and only necessary by overextension. So what's an example of something that's only real by acknowledgement? Like authority figures. You say, oh, a president or a whatever, right? A president or a prime minister. So if their power was real and absolute, then you couldn't just do the following, which is, what if everybody tomorrow just disacknowledges them and says, you know what, I don't like this guy anymore, we don't acknowledge their power anymore, and that's it, it's gone. So it's just not arbitrary that, oh, it's imaginary, it's not absolute, it's not real. Just because a collective of people, you know, somehow defers to that and acknowledges that, that doesn't make that power real, right? As opposed to something like, oh, actual, you know, actual power of something that speaks for itself. Like, no, it's just imaginary, because you could just, tomorrow you could turn around and everybody could just not acknowledge it and say, oh no, they're not the president anymore, they're not the prime minister, and they wouldn't be if everyone or the majority of people just don't acknowledge it. So that's how arbitrary and fickle and much of a construct that is. And then I had a better way, I think, to explain that, but basically, you know, real power wouldn't be up to that, right? It wouldn't be up to acknowledgement or subjective sort of pretense. Or by that logic, you could do that with anything then. Like tomorrow, then people could just say, you know what, we like Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast could be president, and oh, now he is. Like, so it's artificial. It could be just arbitrary with anybody at any time throughout history. You know, obviously, we would question the credibility of that. Like, we would question the credibility of the kinds of people that have been in power, so it's not like an absolute. And there's like this reverse fallacy that happens, like, oh, they're right because they're in power, they must be right, versus holding them accountable to be right, to a standard, since they're in power, right? We sort of worship power rather than hold it accountable, right? We're sort of subject to it, we're sort of suck up to it kind of mentality, but just in general, as people. So yeah, there are no absolutes. It holds accountable, you know, that your own actions and your own potential, and oh yeah, that which is only necessary by overextension. So you look at technology, like, what, you know, I have a few expressions to do with this. Like, whatever would you do without the benefits and conveniences of modern technology that you rely on, right? You sometimes hear this mindset, oh, you rely so much on technology. Well, a lot of that is only necessary because of the number of people there are. So if you were just out in the jungle alone, living by yourself, or, you're old enough to fend for yourself at least, then you could just figure it out. Right now, there might be certain threats and dangers, and you might die sooner and whatever, but you could figure it out, just like people throughout history have figured it out, just like our ancestor, Neanderthals figured it out. Like, it's not that you couldn't do it, or that you really need society to that extent. So it's more that, again, convenience and things like that. It's more like society needs you as the individual rather than you needing it. And the thing is that right, like certain conveniences, even like, running water. Well, why do we need running water? Because we have so many people that we're providing water to. And because there's a monopolization over means by government and corporations. If you were just one individual person out in nature by yourself, the world is your oyster. There's plenty of water. There's way more than enough water for everybody. But wait, because of the monopolization of means by corporations, a lot of that water might be unclean and polluted, whereas normally, not saying it would all be perfect, but you see that ripple effect. Like, even by trying to be a minimalist, not only do you have to deal with and contend with the monopolization of means by government, by corporations, by people, right, where you can't fish here, you can't hunt here, you're not free to go, you need permission to do every little thing, but you also are subject to its own devices. So now this water that otherwise would be fine is polluted because of human. It's like they'll monopolize all the good resources and fuck up all the rest and damage all the rest so that you can't even use them anymore. So, right, like there's a good visual analogy with that you can picture. Like, there's this one body of water that's really good and really clean, but you can't use that one because this company owns it and they sell water from it. And there's this other body of water, you can use that. But that's where they dump all their excess chemicals and waste and this and that. So you can use that one if you want, right? That'll be the one that you're designated if you don't want to be a part of society. That kind of a reservation type area. So the problem is the fact that, again, a lot of things are only necessary because of, only necessary by overextension. So there's always a pretense of a standard, like, this is the right thing to do, or this is, good, whatever. People will just reinforce whatever state they're in, no matter what it is. But there is no standard. It's just, because of the number of people, we take something that's very basic and very simple, and we make it overextended to the mass that we have. It's like, we need running water, but and this and that. But you only really need it because of the raw number of people. If it was just you, the world is your oyster, and there's plenty of water, there's plenty of food, there's plenty of everything. There's no problem, right? It's just all about how much you're restricted, and again, the sort of seduction of convenience that, we'll make it easier, we'll make it, whatever, but because again, the root of society is a non-consensual social contract where you never make that choice for yourself. Even if you want to do that, you want conveniences in exchange for inhibition and this and that. Nobody really makes that choice. You're just thrust into it. You're indoctrinated, and then you're kind of forced into it. So nobody really chooses that. So it's like the stupid thing where people say, somehow life is a simulation, but it is, and it's called society because it's artificial and it's a construct, and yet we take it, we treat it as absolute when it's clearly right of our own creation actively. So you have to understand the fact that, again, things that are only necessary by overextension, by the sheer number of people, versus, again, if the world was a village of 100 concept that I always talk about, it would not be necessary. But yeah, that fallacy of whatever would you do without the benefits of technology? Or not even that. somebody could say, oh, whatever would you do without the benefits of I can't talk. Whatever would you do without the benefits of society? And then an absolutist could respond, imagine what I could do without its restrictions, without its inhibition. So in other words, you would be free then. So you're inhibited to say, okay, I won't do this, I won't do that, I won't do, I'll inhibit my potential, myself, in so many ways, in every way in life, right, to become this half-mast human function, as I call it. And you'll do that in exchange for the convenience and the technology and everything that you can get out of this overextended mass state. So it's not a privilege, it's a concession for the inhibition. So if you say, okay, take away all the benefits of society, but then take away all its inhibitions too. So now, okay, I'll go out in the woods and I can figure it out. But, oh no, but it's going to overextend and say, you can't go here, you can't do this, you can't do that. So you might think it just applies to like the big things, like, oh, what would you do without its inhibitions? Like now you could commit crimes and stuff, which is true. That would be part of the inhibition, yes. But part of it is just like the freedom to, like the concept of stealing, right? Like the freedom to just live in nature and just survive. Like, how can you make a monopoly over that? But people do. Like, you're not asking for anything. You're going out yourself and getting it. But, oh no, all this land is owned. All this, whatever is so you can't do anything with that. So, or you need permission. So see, it ends up being sort of self-defeating that you have you have a situation where again, hold on. You have a situation where, again, what would you do without the benefits of technology and society? But then on the flip side, what would you do without it inhibiting and restricting and monopolizing every single thing around you? What would you do without that? So we treat it as just like a default. Like, oh, it can inhibit you as much as you want without qualification. But then, oh, somehow you're benefiting from it and relying on it as if there's nothing, this could be seen as, entitlement. Like you feel you're entitled to something, but you kind of are. Because otherwise, okay, then don't inhibit somebody and they can do whatever they want and they're free and they're fine. And they might be happy with that, but instead you have to defer in everything, right? So how is that a logical standard? Right, you take the inherent state of mankind and restrict them in so many ways, right? So many things they can't do, so many things they're not free, so many things they have to be inhibited, right? Controlled and structured and monopolize means and nature and resources. And in return, you get certain conveniences or technology or whatever from society. So you might think, oh, that's a benefit, that's a plus, but it's really a trade-off. It's really an exchange for that inhibition. So if you say, okay, I don't want the benefits of society, then I also shouldn't be subject to its inhibitions. So this is like one of my major story characters that is this self-governing minimalist who is able to have like this neutral zone of his own, right, that is like free of those things, where, and there's actually a pretty cool phrase I use in there, copyright, and all this, everything I say should be copyright anyway, but that entry is consent, or that's actually used with a different character, but still. It's like, okay, this country is governed by Darwinism, or these lands are governed by Darwinism, where, oh, there are no laws and you can do whatever you want. So entry is consent. If you come in there, then it's fair game. You can do whatever you want. Anybody can do whatever they want, but you don't have to go there. You don't have to go there if you don't want to. So see, that makes it seem fair. So the same thing with the minimalist area is like, you can hunt, fish freely. There's no monopolization of means, etc. So like, is there really a place in the world like that? not a very big one anyway in the present time, because again, everything's government monopolized, etc. So again, you would have this neutral zone where there are no restrictions. So you would choose that, right? Pretend you have those three options. You have the monopolized, corporate-owned society where you have convenience in exchange for inhibition. Then you have the absolutist where it's Darwinistic, anything goes, but entry is consent. You don't have to go there if you don't want. And nobody is born there because they don't preserve the stimuli acme in a non-vouching state, if you know that whole spiel that I've said in the past. And that, it's a couple good lines are like, nobody is born in the land of the absolutist, right? The land where many die, but no one is born. So entry is consent. You only go there if you want to go there. Right? You're not forced into it like society. You're not born there and then indoctrinated and have to deal with it or have to... No, the only people who go there of their own free will and choose to be there. No one is born there. No one is brought there. And again, the minimalist one would be more like a neutral state where you're not, again, there's no monopolization of means. It's just like everything is there. Nature and you're free and uninhibited. So again, you have like this designated area that is like that where right, this minimalist area where the world is your oyster and nature is free and you can just do what you want, and there's no inhibition there. And again, in the absolutist situation, there's inhibition, I guess, in a different way, not taken as a baseline standard, but if people, again, our strength prevails, so if they're strong enough to impose upon you, then that's a back and forth thing. So in the machination corporate monopoly one, you have this illusion of something like, oh, we're in a subversive lower value state, but we somehow like it, or it's somehow positive. Or again, it's like a bread and circuses argument where you say, oh, but it's so, we have all these conveniences and luxuries and distractions. None of that actually qualifies the authority or the state. But it's like this series of them, like, well, if we distract ourselves enough, and if we overcompensate enough, and if we have everything be convenient enough that we don't have to question it, we don't have to put forth enough effort to question it, and it's convenient, that makes it somehow a validated or logical state. And also that works with the other side of like social contrivance. If we reinforce and appeal to ego enough, if we do all these things, that somehow makes it valid, that somehow makes it a merited state. But that actually shows the opposite, the fact that you have to distract and react in that manner. So, and one of the inner fallacies of society is that way too, like, oh, well, you owe it something back, even though you didn't choose it, you didn't choose to be born in it, you didn't have a social contract because it's non-consensual, at birth and through indoctrination, but you somehow owe it something back. Like, oh, look, you're discredited if you try to be a minimalist or whatever, because you're discredited because, oh, look, you want to be a minimalist now at the age of 15 or 25 or whatever, but you grew up benefiting from society, even though, again, you didn't choose it and you didn't have much means to control that. So you're kind of tolerating it, or you're kind of forced into it. That doesn't define you. That's totally unfair. Now, once you're old enough, okay, now you can decide. So how could you discredit somebody then? Because then anybody born in society and who grows up in society would be discredited. Like, oh, look, you benefited from it, something you didn't choose. So that means that, oh, you relied on it. Like, oh, what would you have done without it? But that wasn't up to you. That was up to your parents. Your parents could have been minimalist too, and it would have been fine. So you understand the big picture that, right, it can't be the self-fulfilling fallacy of, okay, we're going to give people birth in society, and then indoctrinate them, and then raise them, and then anytime they question that society, then or just do their own thing, right? They not even like false duality, anti, like, oh, they're against society. They could just be, okay, minimalist, neutral, whatever. So what that means is you would discredit them and say, oh, but you relied on society, you needed society, you came from society. But it's like this specific society too, to try to validate. Then, oh, you discredit them, but it wasn't their choice. And so now, that should be a net neutral, right? A person doesn't choose to be born. They don't choose to be born in a particular society. They don't necessarily even choose to benefit from that to a certain age. It's unfair. So there should be a clean slate, like at the age of 10 or 15 or whatever you want to call it, right? The age of self-actualization. Okay, now you can be free to do your own thing and not have to feel like, all the things you didn't choose you're somehow accountable for. Is nonsense, because then that would just reinforce any state no matter what. And so now you understand that there has to be some self-actualization and critical thinking, that despite the state that you're in, you can still be objective about it and then decide for yourself. So don't define people by things that they didn't choose and that they're forced into or that are forced onto them. And then beyond that, you have the ability to consider the fact that even like relying on it or something, the monopolization over means, like, oh, you buy food from the grocery store instead of just growing it yourself. I mean, to some extent you can try to do that, get a little plot of land, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but the obstacles to doing it, especially for the ordinary person, are like you're validating, and you shouldn't do it, but like, oh, you're buying food from these big monopolized corporations, you could starve them out. Take one, this is what an absolutist in the real world might actually do, or a minimalist more like it. Let's starve out the existing powers that be. So like everybody, don't buy anything from stores or corporations or food places or anything. Let's just totally starve them out for one whole generation, and they all go under. And meanwhile, what we're doing is we're fending for ourselves, we're living off the land, we're doing our own thing. And that's all it would take to reset the power structure, right? Like, what does that would be the fallacy the other way. You're 15 years old and you want to be a minimalist and or whatever, and you don't vouch for a society that you didn't choose. Now, what would your parents do, or what would society do? They would say, okay, fine, then go fend for yourself. And you could get a job and you could appeal to contrivance in a different way, but it's like, it'll do it in a two-faced way that seeks reinforcement for itself, because it'd be like, okay, now you're on your own and now fend for yourself, but you can't truly even try to fend for yourself because, again, all the inhibition of everything. It might sound like an excuse, but you have to look at the reality in front of you that it's not, okay, fend for yourself, and you could easily do it, right? Go out in nature and you could do it. You could hunt, you could fish, you could figure it out, but pick berries, do whatever. But the problem with that is, again, the monopolization of means by even private people, corporations, government. Now it makes it very difficult to do that without you'll get arrested for trespassing or vagrancy or something, poaching or whatnot. So that's the problem. It's like, okay, go fend for yourself, and then you try to, and then you get arrested for it. It's like, okay, so what are you actually supposed to do, right? It's like a fake response, right? Oh, if you don't like society or a specific contrivance state, then just don't be part of it and just go do something else, right? Okay, then you try to do something else, but everywhere you go, right, society will outwardly insist and control you. So, right, and restrict something, you still need its permission even to escape it, right? That's a closed structure contrivance state that I would use that term, like, even to be free of a contrivance state, you need that contrivance state's permission, or even the act of being neutral and not simply not being a part of it is framed as a negative, like, oh, you must be against it, you must be anti, you must be a contrarian, you must be trying to prove something, even though right, as if no other perspective or measure or priority could exist. Everything is either contrivance or anti-contrivance. They're just out to, they're a rebel, they're defiant, right? Because nothing else besides contrivance could possibly exist. And it's sort of preying on people's ego that way too. The fact that the fact that you're able to it's preying on people's ego, the fact that you're able to, like, whatever. Okay, let me try to do a different topic. These are like just more mini little segments that I'm doing, but basically the trademarks of that debate format are, and again, I got to stop referring back to, I'll just say, my current debate format that I'm doing right now, kind of. So, like, the hallmarks of it, though, and what I was known for is I was known for being objective, right? So you're being objective, you're not coming from a place of incentive, like, I'm just saying this because it applies to me, or I'm just doing this because, right, I have some opinion or bias. No, you're coming from a state of being objective, and you're also again, being objective and also being very kind of thorough and I don't know, but there were a couple other ways I would describe it, but again, so you can look at anything objectively from the perspective that, right, you're not looking at it, like, for example, a lot of discussion is often just one person insists upon their point of view and someone else insists upon their point of view, and so it doesn't go anywhere because they're looking only from their own preconceived basis, whether they just haven't been exposed to anything else or whether that somehow benefits them and overlaps with their interests. Like, they're not using actual standards to guide the debate. Like, okay, my standard is this and your standard is this, right? And they're both subjective, so nothing is absolute. And then we're going to hold them accountable, which most things would fall before that because there's some inconsistencies you could always point out. But it almost renders the discussion moot then, because it's like, well, by my standard, I'm right, and by your standard, you're right. So in other words, right, like, according to that criteria, that subjective criteria that you have, that might be different than the subjective criteria of others, right? You may have some validation, but there is no one-size-fits-all criteria that applies to everybody all the time and everything. And so it allows you to realize that like, no claims are being made necessarily, right? It's not saying, this is what people should do, or this is what they shouldn't do. It's more, again, let's be aware of the nature of a process. Let's be objective. Let's seek truth and objectivity. And if truth is an obstacle or a negative, right, just objective inherent truth, why should that not be the basis of, and then you decide from there. But instead, again, a lot of what society relies on is subversion. Like, we're going to distract ourselves, we're going to appeal to ego and pretenses and gratification to try to bypass that. And so that allows you to be controlled by it, because then you have some basic understanding. So yeah, what else do we have here? Just Yeah, absolutist philosophy and, again, minimalism kind of overlaps. Both examples of two different ways that you would invalidate or not be a part of a contrivance state, right? Like the specific society that you're in or something like that. You could be a minimalist and starve out society the same way that it would try to starve you out if you don't follow its mandates. So like, oh, if you don't do what uniformly society wants you to do, will get you fired from your job or this or that, social stigma. And but instead the minimalist could say, okay, I don't need society, and then I'll fend for myself. So you can starve it out and it's no longer necessary. And if everybody was like that, then it would no longer even necessarily exist. Or at least, again, the big corporations and stuff would die out. So now you have that. So again, the minimalist would remove the need for society in that way, and the absolutist would do something different where it would be sort of free and uninhibited, which is kind of how the world works anyway. We just don't view it that way. Like, oh, an absolutist would come along and conquer everybody else, and then somebody else would kill them and then conquer them. And like, that's how it actually works. But in the modern day, we look at it in some romanticized way, but it's like, how did we get the countries and the nations that we have? Right? Was it through some moral and well-defined and merited basis, or was it just, oh, people would just conquer and kill each other and do all this? And so, right, like we are on the situation that we're in is not the same one with which we would vouch for. So like if you did the same thing that got us to where we are right now, that would be a bad thing. But we wouldn't be here unless that was done. So for example, like an empire takes over and conquers people and does this and that and kills and enslaves and whatever. So now, if you were to go out and do that, that would be condemned. Or by your standard, if someone was to do that, you would condemn that. Oh, that's a bad thing. But yet you're in a position, and no matter where you are, basically the whole world is basically made like that. So you would invalidate that process. So what is an example of something that came to be without needing that in the first place? So you would condemn, oh, that's a bad process, but yet that's the exact process by which you are in the position you're in and how the current state of the world came to be. And so it's hard to reconcile that, because if that wasn't the right way of doing things, okay, let's just reset and go back to some other state. Or if it is the right way, then why don't we keep doing it? So it's kind of hard to rationalize that. So it's not the right way, but the state that we're in is a result of that way, and then the way that history moves forward in the future is also going to be defined by that way, right? But somehow we come up with euphemisms. Oh, we're doing it to spread freedom around the world, right? And some stupid morality like that, right? So we'd find euphemisms that effectively do the same thing. So again, the common basis of the absolutist would be the functional basis, like you pose a standard to measure and then you have to be consistent with it. Consistency is key, so it doesn't assume the intent. So like if two absolutists meet, they might have very different priorities and measures, as I call them, but what they would have in common is that they would be very consistent with them. It wouldn't just be a pretense that they use to justify something. It would be, okay, we consistently believe in this, we have this measure, and now whoever's ability is greater will succeed at achieving that. So and there's also like a scene in one of those stories that I say, like, the eyes of the absolutists like sort of see through everything, in the sense that they see sort of the needlessness of everything. So it'll seem like a negative, but it could just be neutrality. Like in society, you would see like, okay, or, well, like nothing is really necessary. You don't need banks, or you don't need, right? So these things will insist upon themselves as like, oh, you only need it because of overextension or the mass number of people or something. A lot of these things aren't inherently necessary, especially in their specific reductive state. So you defer to them, you use them, you rely on them, but you don't need them. You don't need anything really, right? So you're controlled by it. That's all it's used for. Or again, on a mass scale, it's more about the the herd mentality. Oh, it wouldn't be necessary because of the number of people. It turns into like an assembly line, which takes me back to one of my logical razors, which is everything mass-produced suffers inequality for it, and that includes even human life, right? That we kind of don't value it to kind of treat it as such, whether it be because of abortions or whether it be because of just having so many children in the first place. Like, you get to a point where you have to question that. So, whatever, that was just like a little bite-sized session, and let me try to think of like one more thing here. There's just so many good discussions that I had that and not to even not give credit to other people there, but a lot of these basic terms and ideas and logical razors were mine. Like, I would introduce them, and then, you know, we could have a discussion within a certain framework, or we could, like, you know, just let logical razors kind of dictate the flow of the debate. Like, okay, I would use them almost like how legal statutes are used in a court setting. Like, okay, we're going to strike that down for being folly favoritism, or we're going to strike that down for being, or not even so much strike it down, but more so identify the nature of the process too, so that you're not, you know, a lot of discussion, it'll just be insisting upon the same thing over and over and beating your chest. It's like, okay, that process is acknowledged, you're referring to this process, and then we let that speak for itself, instead of, you know, beating it like a dead horse. We kind of, okay, this is the nature of the process, this is the logical razor term for it, and so we move on. You know, that's a stimuli acme argument, that's a such and such machination process argument, right? So we're aware of the nature of the process without any claim or like bias or incentive behind it. It's just, this is the process, and so you can come to your own conclusion from that, but you're not leading or preconceived with any sort of intent.